The champagne bottles were still popping in the English dressing room when it happened. While photographers waited outside for the traditional victory shots, whispers began circulating through the Melbourne cricket ground that would ignite one of the most explosive controversies in Ashes history. What England's players did behind closed doors that summer evening didn't just cross a line, it obliterated every unwritten rule of cricket's oldest rivalry. The Australian camp fell silent when they discovered the truth, and what followed was a diplomatic nightmare that threatened to tear apart 140 years of cricketing tradition. The Ashes series has always been more than just cricket. It represents a sporting warfare where respect and intensity dance on a razor's edge, where fierce competition is expected but dignity remains sacred. But somewhere between Brisbane and Sydney during the most recent series, England's approach transformed from confident to contemptuous. Reports emerged of English players mocking Australian training methods during their own practice sessions, loud enough for groundskeepers and support staff to overhear and relay back to the home team. Then came the incidents in the hotel corridors where English squad members allegedly imitated and ridiculed Australian players' batting techniques and bowling actions during casual encounters, turning what should have been professional proximity into a stage 4 psychological warfare that ventured far beyond acceptable boundaries. The Australian coaching staff documented every incident, building a case that would eventually demand intervention from cricket's governing bodies. Former Australian captain Mark Taylor described the behaviour as unprecedented in his 40 years around the game, stating that even during the most heated series of the 1990s, there existed an understanding that certain lines were never crossed. The antagonism wasn't confined to private spaces either. During a press conference in Adelaide, English players made thinly veiled comments about Australian cricket culture that local journalists interpreted as dismissive and disrespectful, sparking immediate backlash across Australian media platforms. Cricket Australia officials found themselves fielding complaints from their own players who felt that the traditional rivalry had mutated into something uglier, something that undermined the spirit that had made the Ashes special for generations. The situation escalated when footage emerged of English players celebrating a dismissal by allegedly directing obscene gestures toward the Australian viewing area where families and cricket legends were seated. What made the situation particularly inflammatory was that this wasn't happening during the heat of on-field battle where emotions understandably run high. This was calculated behavior during breaks, in hallways, and in spaces traditionally considered neutral ground where mutual respect was expected regardless of on-field rivalries. If you're loving this deep dive into cricket's biggest controversies, smash that subscribe button right now for all sports updates. You're home for the stories behind the headlines that everyone's talking about. The ramifications extended far beyond hurt feelings and wounded pride. Cricket Australia chairman Richard Freudenstein called an emergency meeting with his England and Wales Cricket Board counterpart, demanding explanations and assurances that such conduct would be addressed immediately. The ECB initially downplayed the complaints, suggesting that Australian sensitivities were overblown and that competitive banter was being misconstrued as disrespect, a response that only intensified Australian anger and gave credence to accusations that England was institutionally dismissive of their concerns. Senior Australian players, many of whom had competed in multiple Ashes series and understood the tradition of hard but fair competition, expressed frustration that England seemed to be operating without any understanding of or care for the historical significance of the contest. Steve Smith, known for his measured responses to controversy, broke his usual diplomatic silence to state that the behaviour he witnessed went against everything he believed the Ashes represented. Pat Cummins, typically reluctant to engage in off-field drama, confirmed that multiple Australian players had raised concerns through official channels about conduct they found unacceptable. The Australian media, never shy about defending their cricket team, launched into full assault mode. Major newspapers ran front-page stories with headlines questioning English sportsmanship and calling for formal sanctions. Television panels featured former players from both nations debating whether England's behaviour constituted serious misconduct or simply represented a new generation unwilling to observe outdated conventions. The debate split cricket fans globally, with some arguing that Australia's complaints revealed a fragile ego unable to handle modern competitive intensity, while others maintained that England had fundamentally misunderstood that fierce competition and basic respect were not mutually exclusive concepts. Social media amplified every angle, with hashtags related to the controversy trending worldwide and generating millions of interactions. Former players weighed in from across the cricket world, with South African legend Graham Smith noting that he'd competed fiercely against Australia 4 years without resorting to the type of behaviour being described, while Indian batting great VVS Laxman suggested that perhaps both sides needed to reset expectations about where competitive spirit ended and disrespect began. The ICC found itself in an uncomfortable position, caught between wanting to allow players freedom to express themselves competitively while acknowledging that the complaints from Cricket Australia carried serious weight and couldn't be dismissed as mere oversensitivity. An investigation was quietly launched, interviewing players, support staff, hotel personnel, and reviewing security footage from various venues. What emerged painted a picture more complex than either side's public statement suggested. Yes, England had engaged in behaviour that crossed traditional boundaries of respect, including the mocking of opponents in semi-public spaces and making dismissive comments about Australian cricket that went beyond standard competitive trash talk. However, the investigation also revealed that some Australian players had engaged in provocative behaviour of their own, though perhaps not to the same extent or with the same frequency. The findings suggested a mutual escalation where initial slights were met with retaliation, which prompted further escalation in a cycle that spiraled beyond anyone's original intentions. The ICC issued a statement that managed to satisfy no one, acknowledging that behaviours on both sides had occasionally fallen short of the spirit of cricket while declining to issue formal sanctions against any individuals. They emphasised the importance of maintaining the Ashes as a fierce but respectful competition and called on both boards to work with their players on understanding the difference between intensity and antagonism. Cricket Australia accepted the findings but made clear their disappointment that specific English actions weren't more directly condemned. The ECB, while officially accepting responsibility for ensuring better conduct going forward, privately briefed journalists that they felt Australian complaints had been exaggerated and that their players had been unfairly characterised as the sole antagonists in what was a two-sided dynamic. The controversy has left lasting impacts on how the Ashes will be contested going forward. Both boards have implemented new protocols requiring players to attend workshops on cultural sensitivity and competitive conduct before future series, an unprecedented step that some players have privately mocked as corporate overreach into sporting competition. The traditional pre-series dinner where teams gather in a show of mutual respect was notably tense during the subsequent series, with players from both sides going through the motions of cordiality while clearly maintaining emotional distance. On-field interactions have become more carefully managed, with both teams seemingly conscious that any controversial behaviour will be scrutinised through the lens of the previous controversy. Some cricket purists lament that the rivalry has lost some of its raw authenticity, that players are now performing a sanitised version of competitive intensity rather than expressing genuine emotion. Others argue that the controversy was necessary, that it forced cricket to confront uncomfortable questions about where the line between acceptable competitiveness and unacceptable disrespect actually exists in modern professional sport. What remains undeniable is that England's off-field behaviour during that series has become a defining moment in Ashes history, discussed alongside borderline bowling and underarm incidents as examples of when the competition's intensity crossed into controversy. Australian fans haven't forgotten, bringing banners to subsequent matches referencing the incident and chanting reminders of English disrespect whenever tensions rise during play. English supporters have responded by embracing a siege mentality, framing their team as victims of Australian sensitivity and refusing to apologise for what they characterise as normal competitive behaviour. The psychological impact on future series cannot be underestimated as both teams now carry additional emotional baggage into contests, making an already intense rivalry even more combustible and unpredictable. For more explosive cricket controversies and the untold stories that shake the sporting world, subscribe to All Sports Updates and hit that notification bell so you never miss the drama that unfolds when competition